Somewhere in a biology classroom right now, a kid is raising their hand and asking, wait, are we animals? And somewhere else, an adult who should absolutely know better is hesitating before they answer. Because here's the strange truth nobody sits you down and tells you directly. You are not like an animal. You're not descended from an animal. Like it's some distant embarrassing relative you only see at holidays. You are one. Right now. Reading this. You are, at this exact moment, a fully paid-up, card-carrying member of the animal kingdom, and you have been since before you had a name for yourself, before you had language, before you had fire, before you had anything that makes you feel special. So today we're answering a question that sounds almost too basic to ask out loud, and that's exactly why nobody asks it. Were humans animals first? And the answer is going to take us through Aristotle's ladder of life, Carl Linnaeus and his obsessive 18th century filing system, a very awkward conversation about what actually separates us from a chimpanzee, and the surprisingly recent invention of the idea that humans are something else entirely. Let's go. First, we need to deal with a word that's doing a lot of quiet damage in everyday language, the word animal. In casual conversation, we use it constantly to mean not human. Don't act like an animal. That's animal behavior. Humans and animals. Notice that last one. Humans and animals, as if they're two separate categories sitting side by side, like fruit and vegetables. That phrasing is so normal we don't even notice it anymore. But biologically, it's nonsense. It's the equivalent of saying cars and Toyotas, as if a Toyota isn't a car. Humans aren't a category next to animals. Humans are a subset inside the animal kingdom. The same way a golden retriever is a subset inside dogs. There is no biological definition of animal that quietly excludes humans. Every single one applies to us. Completely, without exception. So what actually makes something an animal, biologically speaking? A few very specific things, and it has nothing to do with fur, or four legs, or living in the wild. An animal is a multicellular organism, meaning made of more than one cell, that gets its energy by consuming other organisms rather than making its own food through photosynthesis like a plant does. Animals typically move under their own power at some point in their life cycle. Animal cells lack the rigid cell walls that plant cells have, and animals reproduce sexually, developing from an embryo that goes through specific developmental stages. Read that list again. Multicellular, consumes other organisms for energy, moves under its own power, no cell walls, sexual reproduction through embryonic development. Every item on that list describes you exactly as precisely as it describes a house cat, a jellyfish, or a mosquito. You didn't grow leaves and photosynthesize breakfast this morning. You ate something that used to be alive. That's the animal move. That's what we do. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because the idea that humans might not be animals, that we're something categorically separate and elevated, is actually a very old habit of thought, and it goes back much further than most people assume. Aristotle, writing in the 4th century BC, proposed something historians now call the Great Chain of Being, a hierarchical ladder of existence with minerals at the bottom, then plants, then animals, then humans, and then, depending on the version, divine beings above that. Humans were placed on the ladder, technically among living things, but consistently described as the top rung. The most perfect expression of animal life, defined mainly by rationality, by the capacity for reasoned thought. This framework didn't stay in ancient Greece. It got absorbed into medieval Christian theology almost wholesale, reinforced for well over 1,000 years, and it planted a very specific idea deep into Western thinking. Humans are animals, technically, sure, but really we're something else, something above. The latter metaphor did enormous cultural work. It made human exceptionalism feel less like an opinion and more like a fact of nature, baked directly into the structure of the universe itself. Then, in 1735, a Swedish botanist named Carl Linnaeus published a book called Systema Naturae, and he did something that, looking back, was almost an act of quiet scientific rebellion. Linnaeus set out to classify every known living organism into a nested system of categories: kingdom, class, order, genus, species. The taxonomic system biologists still use today with only minor modifications. And when Linnaeus got to humans, he didn't invent a new kingdom for us. He didn't carve out a special exception. He placed Homo sapiens directly inside the animal kingdom, inside the class of mammals, inside an order he named primates, sitting right alongside apes and monkeys. This was, for the time, a genuinely radical move. Linnaeus was a devout Christian working in an intensely religious era, and he still looked at the evidence: anatomy, reproduction, reproduction, physical structure, and concluded there was no honest way to classify humans as anything other than an animal among other animals. He reportedly received criticism for it in his own lifetime, precisely because putting humans in the same category as monkeys felt, to a lot of people, like an insult rather than an observation. Linnaeus wasn't insulting anyone. He was just doing taxonomy correctly, over 100 years before Darwin ever set foot on the beagle. Which brings us to the part of the story most people already sort of know, but haven't fully sat with. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, and the core claim wasn't just that species change over time. The deeper, more uncomfortable claim was that humans and every other animal on the planet share common ancestry, that we are the products of the exact same evolutionary process that produced every other living thing. No exceptions, no shortcuts, no separate creation event just for us. Genetic evidence gathered over the following century and a half has done nothing but confirm this with increasingly overwhelming precision. Humans share roughly 98 to 99% of our DNA with chimpanzees and bonobos, our closest living relatives. We share about 90% with cats. We share around 60% with fruit flies. We share meaningful chunks of our genome with bananas. Not because we're secretly plant adjacent, but because the fundamental molecular machinery of life, the way cells divide, the way energy gets processed, the way genetic instructions get read, is so ancient and so foundational that it predates the split between animals and plants entirely. We are, quite literally, built out of the same basic biological code as everything else that has ever lived, arranged in a slightly different configuration. Now here's a specific detail that tends to genuinely surprise people. The human lineage and the chimpanzee lineage split from a common ancestor somewhere between 6 and 7 million years ago. That sounds like an enormous gulf of time, and on a human scale it is. But zoom out to the scale of life on Earth, which has existed for roughly 7 billion years, and 6 or 7 million years is a rounding error. It's less than 0.2% of the total history of life. If you compressed the entire span of life on Earth into a single 24-hour day, humans and chimpanzees would have split from their common ancestor about 2.5 minutes before midnight. 2.5 minutes out of an entire day. We are an almost unbelievably recent branch on a tree that has been growing for nearly 4 billion years. And yet, we somehow convinced ourselves we're standing at the top of it, looking down. So if humans are animals, biologically, unambiguously, why does it feel so instinctively wrong to a lot of people? Why does calling a human an animal in casual conversation still land as slightly insulting? Or slightly reductive, like you're stripping something important away? The honest answer is culture, not biology. Humans do have traits that are, if not entirely unique, at least extraordinarily developed compared to other species. Complex symbolic language. Cumulative culture, meaning knowledge that builds generation after generation instead of resetting with each individual. Abstract reasoning about things that don't physically exist, like justice, or the number 7, or next Tuesday. These are real differences, and they matter enormously for how human societies function. But here's the key distinction that keeps getting lost. Differences in degree are not the same thing as differences in category. A chimpanzee that uses a modified stick to fish termites out of a mound is engaging in tool use and cultural transmission, teaching the technique to its offspring, refining it slightly over generations. Crows solve multi-step puzzles that would trip up plenty of adult humans. Dolphins have signature whistles that function almost exactly like individual names. Octopuses problem solve with something that looks uncomfortably close to genuine curiosity. None of this makes these animals human, but it does mean the wall we imagine between human cognition and animal cognition is a lot blurrier and a lot more recently built than most people assume. Let's talk about where that wall actually came from, because it's more recent than you'd think. And it wasn't really built by biologists. It was built largely by philosophers, and later reinforced by industrial and religious institutions that had very specific reasons to want humans categorized as separate from and superior to the rest of the living world. René Descartes, writing in the 17th century, went so far as to argue that non-human animals were essentially biological machines, incapable of genuine consciousness or suffering, operating on instinct alone with no inner experience whatsoever. This wasn't a fringe opinion. It shaped mainstream European thought about animals for centuries, and it conveniently justified treating animals however humans wanted to. Because if something can't suffer, you don't have to feel bad about how you treat it. Modern neuroscience and animal behavior research have thoroughly dismantled this idea. Mammals share the same basic brain structures associated with emotional processing in humans. Birds, display behaviors consistent with grief. Fish have pain receptors and demonstrable stress responses. The Cartesian wall between humans and mere animals wasn't a scientific discovery. It was a convenient philosophical position that outlived its usefulness by about 300 years. Here's something that tends to reframe this whole conversation once people actually sit with it. Ask yourself what specifically makes a human different enough from other animals to warrant an entirely separate category. Is it tool use? Chimpanzees use tools, crows manufacture them, octopuses use coconut shells as portable armor. Is it language? Many animals communicate with remarkable sophistication, even if not with full grammatical syntax, the way humans do. Is it emotion? Elephants appear to mourn their dead, returning to bones of deceased relatives repeatedly over years. Is it self-awareness? Chimpanzees, dolphins, elephants, and magpies have all passed variations of the mirror self-recognition test, recognizing their own reflection as themselves rather than another individual. Every single trait people reach for to explain human uniqueness turns out to exist, in some form, somewhere else in the animal kingdom. What's actually unique about humans isn't any single trait in isolation. It's the specific combination, and especially the intensity, of language, cumulative culture, and abstract symbolic thought, all operating together at a scale nothing else on the planet has matched. That's genuinely remarkable. It's just not evidence that we stepped outside the animal kingdom to achieve it. If anything, it's evidence of what an animal brain, refined through several million years of specific evolutionary pressure, is capable of doing. There's an argument worth sitting with here, sometimes called human exceptionalism in academic circles, and it's worth being fair to it, because it's not a stupid position. It's just a contested one. Some philosophers and theologians argue that even if humans are animals in a strict biological classification, the sheer scale of human cognitive and cultural achievement, language complex enough to write poetry and physics equations, technology capable of reshaping entire ecosystems, moral reasoning sophisticated enough to build legal systems and debate ethics, represents a genuine qualitative break from the rest of the animal kingdom, not just a difference of degree. Under this view, classifying humans purely as just another animal undersells something real and meaningful about human experience and responsibility. It's a real philosophical position, held by serious thinkers, and reasonable people disagree about where exactly the line between difference of degree and difference of kind actually sits. Biology answers the taxonomy question clearly. It doesn't fully settle the philosophical one. So let's bring this back to where we started. Were humans animals first? The question almost answers itself once you look at it directly, because it assumes there was ever a before, some earlier state where we were something else, something that later became an animal. There wasn't. There's no fossil, no genetic marker, no evolutionary moment where a non-animal ancestor crossed a threshold into animalhood and became us. The line runs backward, unbroken. Animal after animal after animal, all the way through the primate lineage, through early mammals scurrying around the feet of dinosaurs, through the first vertebrates in ancient seas, back roughly 600 million years to the earliest multicellular animals that ever existed. We didn't start as something else and become animals. We started as animals, and we have never, for one single generation, stopped being exactly that. Everything else, language, cities, spaceships, philosophy, the entire staggering weight of human culture, all of it was built by an animal, using an animal brain, running on animal biology, that happened to evolve a specific combination of traits that let it do something no other animal on this particular planet has managed to do quite the same way. That's not a demotion. If anything, it might be the single most impressive thing an animal has ever accomplished. So next time somebody says humans and animals like they're two separate things, you can tell them, gently, that they're describing a group and one of its most overachieving members, like they're strangers to each other. We're not the exception to the animal kingdom. We're one of its stranger, louder, more accidentally poetic experiments. And we've been an animal this entire time.